Cool. Evening, everybody. All back from our holidays, tanned up, I see. Can't beat Norfolk. Right, we'll make a start with a podcast. It's very loud, isn't it? Is it, mate? It's very loud. No. Apologies, we've got 4 tonight. Councillor Culwick, replaced by Councillor Runciman. Councillor Knight, replaced by Councillor Healy. Councillor Nelson, replaced by Councillor Melly. Councillor Wilson, replaced by Councillor Whitcroft. Any other apologies?
Did we also just record that although Councillor Maroney is on the list of to attend?
Yes,
he's
a
actually
separate
not as a
item.
member of the committee. And
Yes, we had to note he's not longer a member of the committee, but may become a member of the committee. Is that right?
No, he's on the front sheet. But
Yeah, sorry, he's on the front sheet, but he shouldn't have been on the front sheet. There you go. So Councillor Maroney is not a member of this committee. Councillor Webb.
Just say Councillor Kilbane and Councillor Steels-Walshaw aren't attending tonight as exec members. You've got me and Councillor Pavlovic. Sorry in advance.
We'll settle. Cool. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Crawshaw.
thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm going to declare a private interest in relation to agenda item 5. I've declared that previously. On this occasion, I'm going to withdraw from this item. So I'll just take a seat in the back of the room and come back to the table for agenda item 6.
Okay, no worries. Minutes of the last meeting? Any views, comments, or are we happy?
I'm not aware what that exception is, but my son goes to St Oswald's, the dyslexia centre. So is that not an interest? Good.
You're
Cool.
Are you going to say correct the minutes of the meeting you weren't at? Are we happy with the minutes? Post second? Cool. Public participation? Unfortunately, this evening we have none. So we'll come on to finance and performance. Richard.
To give a brief intro. Yep. Okay, so this is the outturn for 23-24. A little bit delayed because of various issues within the national political scene earlier in the summer, which caused a number of reports to be taken to executive later than originally planned. And of course, we present these reports to scrutiny after they've been through executive. So in the sort of usual style of these reports, you do have the overall council summary at the start of the paper, showing how the outturn position panned out compared to the position at Q3. That's under paragraph 9. The table under paragraph 9 sets that out. This was discussed at executive early in the summer, I think in August, and shows that because we have to, the outturn position was balanced at the end of the year, but that was done with a significant use of council reserves. As you can see in that table, earmarked reserves, but that was less than we were anticipating at Q3. So an improved position from Q3 or from monitor 3 to the year end, but still some significant pressures in that outturn position. And then moving on to the table at para 10, which is the areas of the council's budget that this committee is scrutinising. So you've got the whole of the Children Education Directorate budgets in there, and then also some elements, culture and communities at the bottom there that make up the total position. And again, you'll see there's been an improvement from the monitor 3 position in the left-hand column, reporting just under 3.7 million as a projected overspend at monitor 3. And the final outturn about 2.3 million. So an improvement about 1.3, 1.4 million between monitor 3 and the final outturn. And then there's explanations of the final outturn position, and then also some of the movement between Q3, monitor 3, and the final outturn, which was due to 2 or 3 things really. I think I would highlight there. So significant work within the services. So everybody was working exceptionally hard to look at expenditure and income, particularly in the latter part of the year because of the overall position. and that's obviously been successful. And then we also looked at how we could best use external grant income and also use of reserves as well. So we took some decisions on how we were going to use reserves at the end of 23-24 that helped the overall position, and that's why we've ended up with that improved position. I'll stop there and open up to questions.
Questions? Oh, Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the virtual school, I'm conscious that there had been money taken back in from schools. So it's understanding that that saving did not impact on the experience of schools for that service. And also the paragraph 16 refers to a clawback of some unspent payments and future expenditure on disabled children's services figure. So it's understanding, is that coming from teams within the council, or is it coming from individuals, which would be a more stringent clawback?
Okay, so on the first one, I think my understanding is that the virtual school savings didn't have an impact on the actual provision. So we were taking advantage of the grant regime that's in place and maximising the amount of that grant that we could allocate to fund some of those services. So I think that's correct in terms of that one. And then in terms of I think you're referring to the review of the historic direct payments paragraph 16. So what we've done there is looked at, so these are balances that will be held within not direct within the local authority. So these will be held by parents or young people as part of their direct payment accounts, and that's been a review of those funds that haven't been used and haven't been deemed as necessary to be used. So again, my understanding is that shouldn't have affected the actual provision for any of those individuals. And as part of that withdrawal of those balances that have been held, then there'll be a review of the provision that's required. So the correct provision will continue to be put in place for those individuals. So it shouldn't have had a direct impact on their provision.
Yeah, just the ongoing work on the safety valve, it's understanding how that is meeting government expectation in order to make sure that we deliver the outcome that's anticipated in terms of longer term stronger position.
Yes, I mean, I think what we were reporting this at the outturn for 23-24, and we are on track in terms of delivering that up until that point in 23-24. We do know that it then becomes much more challenging as we run through 24-25 and 25-26. So we're currently reviewing that position, and I think we've just submitted a second monitor for this year to the DfE. Yeah, that probably showing a slightly more challenging position. But I think, Maxine, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just to say it's actually coming later on the agenda, so you've got more substantive report on that particular issue.
Well, thank you, Chair. I was going to ask about the home to school transport overspend, and given that we've got an increase in numbers for post 16 to 19. Yeah, we're dealing with some of that partly through local provision rather than expensive external provision. What I'm interested in knowing is what do we anticipate this turning into or turning out to, if I want to misquote the language, in future years, particularly over the next 3 or 4 years? I mean, are we expecting the number of 16-year-olds plus to stay the same? I would have expected it to increase. Question is are they going to fall off the end post 25? Or is that number going to increase in the middle in the 16 to 25 range?
Okay, I mean, I'll give a start there. So in terms of the numbers, they have increased significantly over a number of years. Hence, we've got that overspend. We were not planning on them reducing significantly in 24-25 when the budget was set. And in fact, in the 24-25 budget, there was significant growth allocated to that area because of that particular issue. But I think, Maxine, you're going to come in on what's actually happening on.
Yeah, there's work that the transport team are just starting, which is about looking at more independent travel training. So we just recently added some new posts into the travel training team, and that work has now started. So one of the things that we're wanting to do with parents and carers is very much promote active travel, and also although there is a continuing overspend, it's important to recognise that some of this was an undelivered saving of 400,000, which has been in this budget for a number of years, and it was because that was an unrealistic saving that was identified at a time when pupil numbers were growing, and it was actually impossible to deliver the statutory school transport duty and take that amount of money out of the budget. What I would say is that the school transport team have made significant inroads into that deficit because they're doing things very, very differently. They are getting more and more people out of taxis and into different forms of transport. They've really revolutionised one bit of the transport budget, which is to deliver all of the send transport savings that were identified around transport to the Danesgate community. And again, they've created considerable ongoing savings on that Danesgate transport budget by moving towards a fleet of vehicles rather than individual taxis. So it's ongoing work which is delivering some quite significant improvements. But as with anything, it takes time because it's also about behavioural change and people changing the way that they feel comfortable about transport. We are very much working with parents and carers about preparation for adulthood and the fact that independent travel training is part of that preparation around independence. So, turning it into trying to reassure parents and carers that it's an important life skill that's being developed, that's being supported, rather than we're just trying to save money on a transport budget.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I may just follow that up briefly. I think it's commendable to see the results of the work that we've done earlier actually bearing some fruit here. I suppose the question is, what I was trying to ask earlier on, didn't really say it specifically, was, are numbers going to rise to the point where we are going to be outstretched in beyond our depth in terms of making savings, in terms of using public transport with vouchers, as opposed to using taxis and the other means we've got in here?
As I've said, it's difficult to predict at the moment, but what we are seeing is some changes in the way that individuals are beginning to look at different aspects of transport. The transport team are much more rigorous in their assessment of eligibility than they've ever been. And they are ensuring that, they're having very, very proactive conversations with when is it right. So they've even this year, they've managed to get some people who've been in taxis for quite a long time out of those taxis and into alternative methods of transport. So it's, as I say, it's an iterative piece of work, but we do feel that there are signs that we're making progress with it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Well, Councillor Webb wants to add a bit, and then it's Councillor Crawshaw, Councillor Lumsden.
Yeah, I'll just be quite brief, but Councillor Cuthbertson, just sort of reassure you, myself and Councillor Villiers were in a meeting on the Thursday, I think, last week, where it was the education team and sort of the iTravel team, and we were bringing them together. And I have to say, I was really, really impressed with the work that's been going on so far. And I think you're right to say that are the numbers rising of children where the SEND? I mean, it's very obvious they are. But children grow up, and therefore we need to think about what are we doing with those children that are coming through the system, and how are we changing those behaviours before we get into the place where we are now. Because we repeat what we've been doing, what you suggested will definitely happen, which is why we're looking at that change. So yeah, it's been a really positive thing, and just thanks to the team.
Cool. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of questions. It was on a different topic. I wasn't sure whether Councillor Runciman's was follow on from this particular.
So.
Sorry.
Really quick, paragraph 18, second sentence. This is a much more cost-effective alternative to expensive outer city provision. Can you quantify that? Feel free to come back at another time.
I think the short answer is probably not in detail, but you know, Martin's going to quantify it now, aren't you?
Absolutely. So I think if you look at the overall budget here, what you're seeing is a £4.5 million reduction over the last 2 years, and that is a result of behaviour change and doing things differently. So not putting young people in expensive external residential placements, bringing young people back to the city. I think we know that external provision is hugely costly, and actually includes, interestingly, transport as well. So, you know, if we're buying something for children out of the city, we've also got the considerable transport costs to get them there and to get them back. So they obviously come back and visit their family. So it's absolutely inevitable that it's going to be significantly cheaper. I think the other thing that I'd just like to point out, whilst I've got the speaker, is that transport, logistics generally across the country have seen the greatest degree of inflation over the last couple of years than anything else. So these savings, or actually keeping a stable position, I guess it's even more challenging when you account for inflation, which is well over 10% in this area of the service. I think in short answer to your question, we know it's considerably cheaper to keep children local, to keep them in provision, but actually it's better for children long term. When you people start to go in more expensive provision, then that lasts a lifetime. They tend to stay in expensive provision. They don't tend to go back into a cheaper provision.
I think just to clarify as well, the point I think of that paragraph well is to say that the provision itself for high needs children, for SEND, is the actual provision is charged to the DSG. So those savings, when that happens, come to the DSG, but the transport cost sits on the general fund. So you'll get those savings that Martin's talked about will be in the DSG, but the general fund cost may increase if we've got local transport arrangements to put in place. So, you know, we've just got to balance the two up there. So you'll have an increase in the general fund, but a saving in the DSG that would outweigh it. But you can't move the funds between those two areas, unfortunately.
Thanks, Chair. I think probably first question, hopefully quite a quick answer. It's just page 13, paragraph 15, and probably Martin, you'll be the person to answer it. And it just talks about there being an underspend within the MASH and targeted intervention teams. The amount looks like it's possibly one full-time equivalent, and I just wanted to be reassured that that vacant post isn't having any impact on our statutory obligations and caseloads and those sorts of things.
Very quickly, no. So we're constantly under review of how we want to manage and staff the teams. I think what we haven't jumped to is every time we've got a vacancy, we've then replaced that with an agency member of staff, for example. So we're managing the service differently, but no, it's not having an impact. And certainly our data and performance in the MASH at the front door has consistently got better and better.
Thank you. And then if I may, the second one, which probably is more for Maxine, I'm thinking, it's page 21, paragraph 44, and it's just around the sort of framing and the wording. So it's the section that's sort of talking about the attainment levels for children and young people. And in that paragraph, it sort of refers back to pandemic and talks again about a catch up. And my anxiety is that we focus a lot of the time on a sort of a chunk of lost learning or a chunk of lost development opportunity. But actually, the impact of the pandemic was much broader than that for children and young people. I think there's probably quite a lot of trauma around. I think there's probably children who perhaps experienced something very different and then found going back into a school setting very difficult. And I just, again, wanted to be sort of reassured that when we're thinking about the impact, we're not just thinking purely in academic attainment terms, we're thinking about the whole child and how the council's supporting the whole child.
No, we're definitely not just thinking about the academic outcomes at all. And obviously the work that's being done at the moment by our school reintegration worker is looking at the child and the family in the round rather than just their academic outcomes.
So if I may, just in terms of a follow-on from that, and I fully appreciate that there's a certain amount of shorthand that goes into these sorts of reports. If there's something that could be done just to kind of finesse when we're talking about that catching up, that it is the broader sense of what's perhaps been lost or missed, not just about the academic attainment. I think that would just help all of us in terms of our thinking about how we're addressing
I think, to be fair to the schools, they put more investment into their pastoral teams as a result of the experience of COVID than they probably did into their academic catch-up. And you know, the majority of schools in the city have invested quite heavily in their pastoral teams over the last 3 years.
Councillor Runciman.
Thank you, Chair. Page 13, paragraph 13. This may be another area, Martin, that's being reviewed, but will those vacancies held in safeguarding interventions and assessment be held into future years, or will they be filled? And then I will have a supplementary.
So I think the structure in the organisation will continually change and depend on demand and need, and where we need to put, I guess, individual members of staff across the service. It may fluctuate and change, but we keep it under constant review, looking at performance and data. So I think we have identified from memory, I think we have identified a longer term saving at the front door, because we felt that there was an opportunity to take a post, either half a post or a post out, but that is from memory.
Right. The supplementary is, are we absolutely sure that won't jeopardise safeguarding in any way if those vacancies continue?
Yeah, most definitely. So what we haven't done is, just to be really clear, we haven't taken any posts out because of vacancies. We've actually over recruited to social work this year. So as of September, we won't have any vacancies in social work at all. Where there are vacancies that we're holding, it's because we don't feel it's necessary to have that post filled to meet that current demand at that part of the service. So that I'm very, very sure that that's not going to have an impact. As I said earlier, the performance in that team, the measure of performance is really clear in a front door, that you have to screen anything that comes through the front door within 1 working day. And that's consistently very, very high by comparison to where it's been in the past.
Thanks, Chair. It's sort of become a bit of a supplementary following Councillor Runciman's questions. So I hear your answers and I do appreciate them, but I guess I just want to test it one more time. Paragraph 11 mentions that increase in safeguarding, there's an increase in safeguarding activity. So are we saying that even with that increase, what you've just said is still fairly reliable? I'm assuming you're going to say yes. You're not going to turn around and say what I've just said isn't reliable. but you know, those paragraphs that sit closely together do raise eyebrows. Do you see where I'm going with it, where I'm coming from?
Could you just repeat the paragraph, sorry?
Yeah, so paragraph 11 on page 12, and it's the final sentence. Costs are increasing due to inflation and increase in safeguarding activity. So I'm linking that to the comment in paragraph 13 around the vacancies being held in the safeguarding interventions and assessment teams, and you saying it's probably all right because we've over recruited. Am I speaking a different language here? Right, okay, cool, fair enough.
So, no, I think when we talk about, I think we're probably getting confused with the front door, which is where everything comes into the service, which is multi-agency front door, as the police, health, and the local authority who make decisions about whether something needs to go to early help, whether we give information, advice, and support, or whether something goes into our statutory social work system and goes for assessment. When we talk about safeguarding more broadly, that's right across the service. So from our data and performance, we know that that our quality of practice has significantly improved. We've had a number of peer reviews. We've had a peer review at the front door, which went extremely well. I'm extremely confident that in terms of managing the detail of the service, that we've got the right staff in the right place. We haven't got any risks that would be obvious as a result of not having enough staffing. I think within the service we've also increased number of posts over a period of time as well, and the fact that we've actually changed some social work roles into what we call family help workers, family support workers. So it's not just about social workers. It's about looking at the whole system as a whole. But no, I have no concern whatsoever that we've reduced the capacity or quality of the service as a result of holding one or two vacancies.
Councillor Whitcroft, unless yours was a supplementary, Councillor here. No. Councillor Whitcroft, then Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to page 21, point 45 about the number of homeless households with dependent children in temporary accommodation. Point 46. It says about there are 26 households who are in this position. It says most of them most of them were recorded as accommodated in hostels and one within local authority housing stock. Is that the only household that isn't in a hostel, or are there any other sorts of variations there? I just want to understand if there's anyone missing in the figures that we don't know where they're being housed. Point 20 and point 46.
So as far as I'm aware, I'm not sure I fully understood your question. So
Okay, no, do you want me to repeat it?
yeah,
Okay, so there are 26 households with children in temporary accommodation. Most are recorded as accommodated in hostels and one within local authority housing stock. Is that one family the only one that isn't in hostels? Are the rest of them in hostels, or are there other areas where they're currently being held?
that's certainly how I read it. So that's data that will change on a daily, weekly basis. I'm assuming that at the time of this report that will be the case.
I'm assuming so. I mean, I can go back to business intelligence and just ask that specific question, just to get you a specific answer on that point. Whether hopefully they'll still hold the data at that moment in time, but we can try and get that for you.
Okay, could I just add very quickly, just children that are in temporary accommodation doesn't mean that they're any greater risk than children that aren't in temporary accommodation. There may be good reason for short periods of time. For example, if you've been a landlady of a pub and you've had to give notice on that and you've moved into temporary accommodation for a short period of time, that would be counted, for example. So from a safeguarding perspective, we would pick up any safeguarding concerns based on individual needs of children, not necessarily their living circumstances.
Okay.
Just supplementary on that, if that's okay. It's sort of related, and I'm just flicking through the report and I'm not seeing it here. So I'm not sure whether this is data that we hold or not. The other sort of group that I can think of in terms of children, households with dependent children, are where you have young children in a family where it's appropriate for them to share bedrooms, and then they kind of reach a point where the children are no longer able to share bedrooms, forcing them to move accommodation. And I know that certainly as casework, I'm sure there's a few of us will have had individual households where there isn't appropriate houses for them to move on to. And do we have the data of the number of families that's impacting in terms of whether in a 2-bedroom house and it ought to be a 3-bed or a 4-bed?
That's the man for the answer.
Thank you. That's families in overcrowded accommodation. I can get you the data. It's not incorporated in that because this is a specific KPI around children in temporary accommodation that have presented as homeless. So families that have presented as homeless. I will ask that the overcrowding data be forwarded to yourself, Chair, and thereby to the rest of the committee.
Thank you.
My reason for asking was more just knowing that it was being reported somewhere. So if it's going through the housing scrutiny, for example, I wouldn't necessarily think that it would have to. I don't want to create extra work for people. It's more just that it occurred to me that that's a cohort that we're not hearing about here, that it's probably useful for us to have a sense of.
It doesn't automatically go to housing scrutiny. It's an internal figure around.
We'll have it.
So I will get it for you. We do have that we do have that data. So, but I couldn't just give it you off the top of my head.
Councillor Hewley.
Thank you, Chair. Appendix A, page 27, indicator 81, percentage gap between free school meals and non-free school meal pupils at 15 who attain a level 3 qualification by the age of 19. The rest of the indicators, we seem to do quite well nationally and locally. This one we seem to do really badly at. Can you just give some sort of narrative, A, on just why we seem to be so much higher than everywhere else, and B, why it dipped so much in 21-22, but then seems to have sprang back to almost exactly the same level it then was in 2021.
Would you just repeat the page and
There you go. There you go. So that line, that section there.
oh, I've got number 81. 81 on page 27.
Alex.
Yeah, so what happened, oh, sorry. There was a change in the way that assessment was happening in schools in 21-22, and that was because it was not national testing, it was teacher assessment. And so what we saw in all the data sets was that those teacher assessments came out higher than those national test results. And it had an effect on all national data sets. So for those years, 2020, 21, 22, they aren't comparable to the years previous to that or the year after, which is when we were back into national testing. And that's what caused quite a lot of turbulence within both local and national data.
Okay. The statistics don't bear out that. If you look at the national data, it's 24.5, 25, almost 25, 23, 24, 25. Ours is almost 35, drops to 24, so there's a 10% difference. And then it goes up to 33. So I'm actually less worried about that big dip.
Yeah.
What I'm more worried about is the fact that there's a difference of 8, almost 9% between us and everywhere else.
Yeah, and we have a historic and well embedded disadvantage gap. I mean, that is one of the things that we have within our school system, and that it's partly due to the fact that you've got to remember that the number of disadvantaged children who were hit by who are described by that indicator is actually quite small in York. It's still not acceptable that gap's there, but it is a historic problem within the York school system that this gap has been persistent and stubborn.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
So is this because traditionally our secondary schools have done well, so the ceiling's higher, or is it because our free school meal children do worse, or is it a combination of
It's a
both?
combination of both, yeah. There's very easy ways to narrow the gap, and the way that it's narrowed nationally is everybody does slightly less well. In national data sets. In York, what we've got a very high performing non-FSM cohort of children, and that actually does make the gap an awful lot wider. The other thing obviously to remember is that for that one, the level 3 qualification by the age of 19, there's a lag in the data as well that you've got to account for. But it's also more, I think, for ourselves to challenge the fact that it's an indicator of the equity of access to level 3 qualifications for children who come from an FSM background, because the numbers of them who go on to study level 3 equivalents is also relatively small in comparison to national. And that's it's compounded by the fact that they have struggled to get the national to the national thresholds in Key Stage 4. Because level 3 is A-level equivalent.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Councillor Webb, got a bit more?
Yeah, just to finish off on that, Councillor Healy, I mean, I think for me, the dip first is quite an interesting one, because the dip sort of turns around and quite clearly says, to me, in that year where exams weren't the focus, we found that young people who were from FSM backgrounds and disadvantaged backgrounds, surprise, surprise, they don't do as well at tests because it requires a certain cultural capital, it requires certain levels of comprehension, it requires all sorts of things which they are disadvantaged and they've struggled to access. And so, interestingly, when you've got that and the playing field was in a weird way slightly leveled because it wasn't based on tests, that the figures bear out. The other thing to say is when I bang on about disadvantage in York and the fact that York is a very unequal city, that is where I start from. That figure there of about a third of a difference, So I think that's the kind of thing we want to think about all the time, is there are real differences between our most affluent parts of the city and our most affluent families and our most disadvantaged families. And that, for me, is really important to note. And I'm glad that you've raised it, to be honest, because it's just, again, another opportunity to highlight the disadvantage gap that we have in our city and why we need to focus as much as we can on supporting those young people in disadvantage and their families. Thank you.
Okay.
Any more questions? Well, my question then, since I've got one left. Number 20, is the delay in the implementation of that saving, is the delay gone or is it planned to be gone? Number 20 on page 14.
Okay.
Was delay in the saving?
Yes, it has been implemented.
Yeah.
It was to do with a post in the Effectiveness and Achievement Service. There was a change in the previous government's policy around the ending of appropriate body status for local authorities, which this relates to early career teachers. And there was a year's delay in the implementation of it, which meant that now the appropriate body status has been taken away from local authorities and has gone to teaching school hubs. And so we had to maintain that post for an additional year to be able to close that down.
Right.
But that colleague left on the 31st of August.
Good time. All done. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate it. Maxine and Martin. Send we go.
The send update that is being presented to scrutiny this evening is part of a series of papers that you've received where you've wanted to keep a regular overview of what's been happening around the implementation of the SEND operational plan and also the work that's been going on the delivery of the safety valve agreements. one of the papers that is an annex to the report answers an earlier question by Scrutiny. You raised one of the things that you'd spotted from the operational plan was that there'd been just one area that hadn't been actioned earlier last year, which was around the SEND area health needs assessment. And that has now been completed, and you have the document as part of your pack. That's quite a crucial document, because what that's drawn together is the local and national data around SEND, which we last did in 2020 when we were working on the written statements of action, and that original 2020 assessment became the driving document for our current SEND strategy, which was produced in 2021, lasts until 2025, but we are now starting the review of that strategy. And crucial to it is the outcomes of the health needs assessment as one of the evidence-based documents that we will be using to review work on the current SEND strategy, but also to establish the priorities for the refresh of that strategy. Since you had your last SEND update, there's been an awful lot of national debate around SEND, and that's accelerating. So what I wanted to present to you also was the fact that there is a growing national narrative which acknowledges that the current legislative framework around SEND is not working for anybody. It's not working for parents and carers, it's not working for local authorities, it's not working for health partners or for colleagues in care. And so a recent publication of an independent report by the ISOS partnership was commissioned by the County Councils Network and the Local Government Association. And that drew together the evidence from across that group of stakeholders around why increasingly the SEND system is no longer fit for purpose in the form that it's in at the moment. And we're seeing very, very similar things in York, despite the progress that we've been making in areas of partnership working to deliver the operational plan. There are still the four key facts which ISOS have identified resonates with the areas that we continue to find as challenges locally in York. We have delivered the early parts of the safety valve agreement and stayed within the terms of that agreement. We are now entering the most difficult phase of it because we're into the last 2 academic years of that safety valve agreement. And what we always knew was to make really sustainable change around safety valve, it would require some things that were about system change. And that's the area that we're now moving into. So some of those aspects of system change are things that we're currently working on as we refresh the local area SEND strategy. One of the things that's going to be crucial is the work that we are continuing to do to support inclusion in the education system. So developing that inclusive education system, which is delivering on our SEND outcomes framework. Quite rightly, all children should be able to go to their local school and to learn alongside their peers. To do that, some of them will require higher levels of support than others and higher levels of adaptation to the curriculum. And that's certainly something that we now want to move into with education partners across the city. We developed the ordinarily available provision guidance last year. We want to do more work on that now this September because we've committed to an annual review of that. We're doing that alongside working with partners across the system to look at what what is universal, ordinarily available provision. And I've just opened a discussion around that with health partners today, the way in which they can also help to work with education around supporting that ordinarily available provision. It's a challenge, and it's a challenge because our schools are very busy places and carry numerous different priorities that they're trying to juggle every day. I think, though, there's been quite an important and major change that has happened with the new government, and that is that SEND has moved as a priority within the portfolio of the schools minister. And that's quite an important change, and will drive things like the review of the curriculum, and it will also keep that focus on the work that schools and the broader education system do around SEND. So some national changes we can see are already beginning to be put in train. But I think, you know, what we've also got to bear in mind, and the Secretary of State for Education has been very clear about this, that some of those changes are going to take quite a time to put into effect. And so what we've got to do as a local area partnership is begin to look at what are the most important changes that are going to make the greatest amount of difference to children and young people as we work together to support that inclusive education approach. We also, as well, are engaging in what are our priorities around joint and integrated commissioning as a partnership. So those decisions that we take about how we use resources to support children and young people and families with SEND are also important discussions that we are having at place. How can we use the same resources but slightly differently to improve outcomes in our local area? We are always focused on improving the quality of practice through co-production and voice. And one of the systemic problems with the current SEND system is that it does lend to an obsession on process. And because that process has statutory deadlines, that's why it becomes very adversarial. And people actually lose then the focus on the thing that really makes the difference is not the actual process of putting together an EHCP, but it's whether that gets delivered and whether they're the right interventions to support the child. So rather than just having a piece of paper, making sure that that piece of paper, the impact of it can be very, very clearly seen. And that's one of the things that we do have to work to co-produce, so that everybody is really happy with the plans, the quality of the plans, the fact that they're actually delivering, and also that those plans are about the voice of children and young people. So what are children and young people telling us about what makes a difference to them in education? What is it that they need that will help them to thrive and to achieve and to develop those skills that they're desperate to get to have good adult lives in York? So it's really, that's one of the things that we really do want to focus on as we're refreshing the strategy, how that strategy unlocks that voice and make sure that we're all using it and hearing it. And that will improve our preparation for adulthood. If we're really listening to children and young people and what they're needing on that journey into adulthood, that's actually where we'll get a much stronger approach to preparation for adulthood, rather than professionals telling young people what it is that the answer might be. I've also put in a table which summarises some of the areas of progress in delivering actions in that operational plan. I won't go through those in detail because I'm sure everybody's read them, but it's just to give you comfort that things have been happening in each of those areas. I do want to as well highlight the work of our Parent Carer Forum, because they've, from a standing start, done an amazing piece of work to develop their profile. They have really done a major piece of work this year to separate themselves out from the arrangements that they were in before. They are now constituted as a separate organisation with charitable status. And that's quite a major piece of work that they've undertaken. And at the same time, they've improved engagement with the Parent Carer Forum. So week on week, more people are engaging with the Parent Carer Forum. They have a significant programme of listening events, which they invite us to. And again, are working as real strategic partners around parent and carer voice. So not least in the work that they're doing with us around the Partnership for Inclusion of Neurodiversity in Schools, the PINS project, which is running in 9 primary schools this year. The Parent Carer Forum have done a major piece of work actually constituting mini Parent Carer Forums in each of those 9 schools and running coffee mornings, but are also inputting into what that programme should look like. So really important work that they've been doing. At the same time, we've had a challenging year for the local authority SEND team. It lost its head of service in May when that head of service retired. There have been ongoing capacity issues within educational psychology, and that's against a national background of there not being enough educational psychologists nationally. And the team, as a result, has accrued quite a significant backlog in terms of supporting statutory assessment. And that has impacted on the progress that team's been able to make in meeting the 20-week statutory deadline for assessing and issuing EHC plans at a time when requests for statutory assessment have significantly increased. So more coming in for assessment, and they've at a time when capacity has been reduced. Although we have seen some positives. Our new SEND casework manager started with us in the middle of August. She's already making quite a significant difference in the management of the team. And we've also got 2 very experienced members of staff taking on interim leadership at head of service level. Both of them, again, are making a significant impact on leading the service. One of them is the head of the specialist teaching team, and the other one is the SEND inclusion advisor, Dan Bodie, who, sort of many of you know, leads on school attendance and exclusions. We are obviously going out to recruit to the role, and the hope is that we'll have a suitably qualified new head of SEND by January. But that's not going to, as I say, it's not halting the improvement journey. That continues. It's just that it's had a temporary impact on the way that the service has had the capacity to take on certain things. The other exciting piece of work that we are engaged with is, and again in partnership with the Parent Carer Forum, is having a dedicated SEND hub as one of the family hubs in the city. That goes for executive approval next week. So I'm not anticipating that approval will go through, but I think it will give an exciting opportunity to have a physical front door to the SEND local offer. And again, will be it'll give that opportunity for us to continue developing our innovative practice around SEND. Okay, I will open it up to any questions.
Martin's got the first one, it looks like.
Yeah, just to add, Maxine has very eloquently described the problems and challenges in the system. Just want to be really clear that the send is a system, it's not a service. It's not something the local authority has a part to play. But this is one of the most vulnerable, one of the biggest challenges for local authorities nationally. The ISOS report, an independent report, the response of government has recognised that this is a very, very broken system and that it does need repair and substantial change. The National Association of Directors of Children's Services have made clear that within the next 2 years, the unsustainable level of demand for education and healthcare plans nationally is going to lead to around about £5 billion overspend. That's in the next 2 years, and I think it was about 1.46 billion only about a year or two ago. So it is something that's completely out of control. It is an inspection risk for the local authority. But to be really clear, it's an inspection of the system, and that includes schools, it includes multi-academy trusts, which are obviously managed and supported by the Department for Education. It includes local authority, it includes health. So this is a really complex system. It's broken and it's been inspected nationally. So, that's the biggest challenge of how do you inspect a broken system? And certainly for officers, that's very difficult to find a way through to work with parents in something that we've got to a degree very little control over. The 2014 Act really hasn't served parents or local authorities or public services particularly well. And I think it's going to take some years before we get out the other side of this.
Yeah, I'd add to that the current legislative framework has added levels of complexity that don't deliver good outcomes for children and young people or families. And as I say, it is an obsession with trying to put a process in place, but it hasn't delivered for anybody. It's just left people feeling that it's an adversarial system.
Thank you both. Questions, Councillor Smith? Councillor.
Okay.
Sorry, sorry.
Yeah, I thought it was a very interesting report, and the health needs assessment was particularly fascinating and contained all sorts of little nuggets. But I'll just ask you one, because I'll be here all night. On page 66, there's the interesting fact that more economically deprived wards, there's no correlation between the number of EHCPs and deprivation at ward level. Now, that's very interesting. What was even more interesting, and although I was slightly hampered by the fact I hadn't got colour, was that Sprentful seemed to be at the top of the pile. And what I wanted to know was, has there been any investigation as to why Sprentful ward is up there? Because it's not where I would expect it to be, although I can think of some possibilities. And if there has been any work with the schools, the 2 schools in the ward, to rectify or to find out what can be done to help that situation?
Yeah, you'll notice that one of the other bits of data is about the different aspects of primary need in the city as well. And what we know is that the most prevalent primary need in York is autism, and that we do have certain communities where it's definitely more clustered than others. The other thing as well is that we're just doing some work looking at which schools are more likely to put in requests for statutory assessment than others, because we do get certain patterns, and that may be to do with need in the population, or it may be to do with the fact that they're needing more support around the delivery of ordinarily available provision and SEND support. And that's something that we've been reviewing through the work of the Learning Support Hub, which schools are high users of the Learning Support Hub. Is that actually then correlating into more requests for statutory assessment? So we're looking at this in a full system way. The ISOS report also mirrored that pattern nationally, that again, in the national data, there is no strong correlation between disadvantage and SEND. And so in many ways, we're beautifully mirroring the way that the national picture looks.
one more question which isn't related, but it's related to this report. Sorry? Yeah, of course.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I thought the health news assessment was really interesting, but I think it is quite interesting, that graphic, because it does show there's a lot of clustering and a lot of the central wards don't seem to have as many HCPs. I'm just wondering, this is very geographical, which surprised me. I'm just wondering whether, and you mentioned about school policies and things, whether what's sort of being tested as to whether that's a fair representation of what is actually going on in the different wards, please.
One of the things that I've just asked business intelligence to help is to get under this data. So we are going to be producing some area inclusion maps, which will be mapped against the school clusters, so that we can actually put a bit more detail into this data and look at the variations between schools in areas of the city. So that we originally had 6 school clusters, which are geographical, so they don't map totally on our multi-academy trusts. And what we're going to look at is how do they vary in the same geographical area according to number of children on SEND support and number of children with an EHCP. And that will help us to get under a little bit more what's actually happening down at that granular level. And I think that we're going to use then to begin to spot those variations.
A small request. If you could ask the writer of the report next time to indicate that ASC does not mean adult social care, because in my world, it does mean adult social care, but I did eventually realise it actually meant something else. But if they could, the first time they use it, the usual convention, that would minimise the confusion.
Thank you, Carol. And yeah, I apologise for that. We're terrible for using acronyms, and particularly where they're the same ones.
Okay, Councillor Whitcroft and oh, you've been yours then. No, you're first.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Very pleased to hear about the soft launch of the Talk to Me campaign, and particularly the Parent Carer Forum, and also not just parent carers, but actually the children themselves receiving that feedback. I think that's really important. I just wanted to know, and I appreciate it's very much an ongoing process that's been just initiated, but have there been any sort of concrete findings that have come out of that so far? Or if not concrete findings, what is it in general that parents are saying and wanting to ask about and wanting to see improve, just so that we've got an idea of at least at the early stages, what's preliminarily coming out of this programme?
Yeah, what a lot of parents and carers are saying is that they really want support that is tailored to their children, so that what they want is confidence that the provision that is described in plans is being delivered, first of all, and that somebody is keeping an oversight of that. They also want they do feel that there's a need for some more universal training to support the schools. And that is something that the schools are engaging with very, very well. There's been a lot of access to the webinars that have been put on by the ADHD Foundation this year. We did, supported by the Parent Carer Forum, the 9 schools that are in the PINS project, did a full audit of their confidence in working with neurodiverse children. And that audit has been used to design the training opportunities that they will have over the coming months. But it's come from voice, and it's come from voice from governors, from school leaders, from teachers, and from parents and carers in each of those schools. So some really quite rich things that are coming out of that. Many parents and carers say that they wouldn't go for an EHC plan if they felt that the quality of school support was at a level that was meeting their children's needs. So they're not wedded to having an education, health and care plan. What they want is the right support at the right time for their child.
Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the report, there's Maxine, you say that you're meeting with health people at the moment
Yeah.
because in terms of the long wait for diagnosis, it's referenced on page 62, 64, 79, 81, and it's a recurring theme. So it's understanding what's being done to address that, notwithstanding the national shortage of many of the professions that are required to do that. But it's also, as you just talked about, ECHBs are seen as the only game in town, but if there were greater confidence in alternatives that were potentially more appropriate, that in turn would reduce demand on ECHB plans and would help with the waiting times for those.
Yes, one of the things that we are wanting to do is work with all partners on identifying and meeting need without the need for diagnosis, because some of this is about the correct identification at the earliest possible point of what the issues may be, and then putting in the interventions quickly. So one of the things that I've been talking to colleagues in therapies about today is the work that they're doing, which is developing resources which can support at the universal level. And they're planning a full rollout of those in January. But one of the things that will have to happen is a series of engagement events with parents and carers, with schools, and with other professionals about how those resources can be best used to have an impact and to build that confidence. So it's trying to work in partnership around how do we better use the professional skills that we've got as a multidisciplinary team around SEND to actually focus on need and address that need quickly. So some of that obviously was exemplified through the work that was done through Early Talk for York, and we're wanting to work alongside therapists around similar things around occupational therapy, and I know that's one of the ambitions that they've got as well, so that also that parents and carers feel that they have to rely less on commissioning private assessments themselves.
Thanks, Chair. I just had a couple of questions. One was just going back a little bit about the recruitment difficulties and the impact that's had on SEND services and whether, I know it's problems nationally. Just thinking, is there ways that are being conceived where resilience might be built into what we offer in York, and I guess how we take that forward? That's my first question.
Yeah, one of the things that we're really learning from colleagues in social care is the difference that it makes if you are focusing on supporting people's practice. And that's certainly something that we're now doing with the team, because there is a problem for SEND teams nationally, and that is because they're working in a system that seems to work against them. And it's a job where they get a lot of blame and not a lot of satisfaction. And the attrition rate in SEND teams nationally is massive. It's really what was experienced by social care a few years ago, where they were relying heavily on agency staff. And SEND teams nationally are going down the same route, unfortunately, at the moment. What we're doing is we're trying to listen to what the pressures are within our SEND casework team and work alongside them to begin to remove some of that. A couple of years ago, we thought we were helping them with their pressures by dividing them into phase-specific teams, where those caseworkers who came from a early years and primary background, we're just going to be doing the statutory assessment for families that have got children 0 to 11. And then those with a secondary background would be working with the 11s to 25s. What we realised after doing a review and listening to the SEND caseworkers was that had lots of unintended consequences around unequal caseloads and different pressure points in the team. And also they felt that it was de-skilling them, because they felt as though by concentrating on the phase, they were losing sight of the full journey of the young person through the 0 to 25 nature of SEND. And that actually there were handover points which were difficult for families as well, where they may well have built a relationship with a particular officer, and then it seemed to end artificially. So we've made an immediate change this September to equalise those caseloads. So all SEND the cases have been divided equally now, and all members of the casework team will have an all-age caseload again. And that means they'll have an equal caseload because they're actually being split equally. So we don't get one caseworker with a caseload of 350 and another of a caseload of 197, for example. And that's just one example of the way that was working. And that's an immediate improvement for that team. They feel as though they've been listened to and something's happened as a result. We also have got to invest, just as social care have done, in their professional development. There is no national standards around SEND casework. But what we have done is we've invested in some national training that's been run by an organisation called NASON, who have a SEND casework training course, which our 2 SEND managers have actually signed up to, so they can find out how good that course is and then make a recommendation about rolling it out to the team. Because we do feel that ongoing professional development for the internal team is going to be really important to supporting them and making them feel that we're investing in them as professionals. So it's things like that now that we really need to do to make them feel that actually York is investing in them as a team, and that we're supporting them to get greater satisfaction out of what they do.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think I mean there is a particular issue, again nationally, around particularly education psychologists. So every education healthcare plan requires an education psychologist to provide statutory advice, and there is only so many education psychologists nationally, and they're trained nationally and funded by government. So there's lots of work I think we need to do, not just locally in York, but to influence what can happen regionally and nationally. There's a piece of work happening at the moment regionally across the 15 authorities around trying to measure what we're all doing. There's a local authority that's got some funding from government who are trialling a new EHCP format. I think, you know, for me, there's something about, it's not just about timeliness, it's having an EHCP. It's something that at the end of it, it's really meaningful for the people that need it. The people that need it are often school teachers, SENCOs. You know, I think some of the documents that we produce are very weighty, very complex to read. And actually there's something about it's trying to simplify all of that process to identify actually what's the 5 things that will really impact on change for your child this year, rather than trying to think about the whole lifespan of a child. Actually, we need to do it this year, and then we need to review it and look at that differently next year, because we know that children change throughout the journey of going through school, and particularly sort of the transitions they go through from 11 to sort of 14, 15. So I think there's lots of different aspects of this that will take time. And we are having lots of conversations locally and nationally about how can we influence change. You know, we don't need an education psychologist to give advice on every single case. We probably do need them in the more complex end of the spectrum. The way we would change that is to change some national policy. But we're doing that, and we're having conversations with the right people, both civil servants and government ministers. And I think York is getting recognised and getting on the map as somewhere that that we can make a change with small amounts of money. We are getting some interest around civil servants and ministers wanting to come and see the work that York are doing. And the more influence we can have in that, the better in terms of trying to trial different approaches and new approaches. But fundamentally, we can't just keep doing more of the same and keep chasing. It's the same as the previous question earlier on around, we're only going to have so many clinical psychologists in the country. We're only going to have so many speech and language therapists. We can keep chasing more and more. We're only going to get a bigger problem at the end of it. We've got to try and think of different ways of delivering it. So those are the things that we're working on right across the system rather than just a particular part of it.
Yeah, thanks for that. Our second question was about the voice and centering the voice, and just in terms of that disproportionately boys and girls are affected by SEND and also ethnicities, gypsies and travellers, obviously an issue close to my heart. And I'm just wondering what we're doing to sort of capture that in that voice and how we're ensuring that the diversity of voices are heard in that voice of CYP.
Yeah, we've got, we're constantly thinking about how can we extend the voice, because the big problem is with formal voice groups is you tend to hear the same children within them. And so one of the things that we are wanting to do is look at how we can get more opportunities to gather voice more naturally, and also in different forms, because some of our children and young people with EHCPs are non-verbal. And so we've got to find more creative ways to get their views and their voices. And we have got some good examples of practitioners who are doing that and are really working in different and innovative ways. Voice is very, very strong in the work of our EPs. And we had a visit from a peer local authority on Friday, and they were really impressed with the way that our EPs work on voice, and did highlight that as one of the strong areas that they could see. But I think the big thing is as well that young people have got to feel that their voices are being heard and making a difference. And that's the bit that we've got to get right as well. So it's not just gaining their voice, it's what we're going to do with it as a result of that. And I think that's the real big challenge for all professionals, because there's a lot of work going on around getting voice, but it only makes a difference if those young people can see that their voice has been heard and we do something differently.
Okay.
Well, I think it's really interesting, the space nationally. It's not, voice of children hasn't been built into in the same way as we would certainly expect in children's social care. It's not being built into the Act itself. The voice of parents is really strong. So we have done lots of work locally to think about actually how do we bring the voice of children out, because actually they have their own rights outside the parental rights. They have their own rights under European legislation and British legislation. So we're really keen to think about from a child's perspective, for example, if there needs to be an EHCP and there needs to be an extra person in the classroom to support them, what does that mean from the child's perspective? Is that what they want as well as what the parents may want or what the education system may want? So I think there's some work that we can do that's really creative over time.
Yeah. And there is a piece of work to do with parents and carers about the fact that sometimes young people will say they don't want a plan, or they're ready for the plan to end, but the parents and carers are not ready for that. And that's quite a challenging thing. So it's working alongside everybody around how are we ready to accept that voice when it's heard.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a huge amount of great work being done here in extremely difficult circumstances, and I'm nowhere close to getting my head around it, to be honest. I'm new to this committee, so I'm grateful for the education, and I'll continue to be. But one thing that sort of stands out for me behind all of this, and it's a very, very distant second to the actual work that is being done, is how we speak to the city about it.
Yeah.
It feels to me like this is an almost hidden part of council life, but it's one of the biggest and most challenging parts of council life. And there's many people out there who want other people to believe that councils are only about bins and verges, and we need to shout about this. So my question is, in your honest opinion or opinions, because you've both been, you know, contributing, how connected is all of this work to the sort of comms department? And, you know, do you think more could be done? You know, I'm not asking for cameras to follow the children around, but, you know, it'd be great to hear from the staff about not just the good things they're doing, but the struggles.
Yeah.
Because there's been so much said in this meeting that should be thrown out there to the 200,000 people that live in this city. And they might start to slowly put the pieces together about what this council is and the struggles it faces. And it's just I think it's a crying shame that it will just, it will mostly just fade away after this meeting's happened until the next meeting and then the next meeting. Do you get where I'm coming from?
Yes, no, I do, absolutely. And it is one of the things, obviously, that we do. For me, I would like us to be, as a city, at the forefront of demonstrating a true inclusive society, in which, you know, sort of children and young people do see themselves as living in a city that celebrates their difference. And I think that's one of the things that is very much at the heart of this. Sometimes when you speak to children and young people who have been identified with special educational needs, the thing that they most want is they want the things that all other children want. And they want to be part of friendship groups. They want to be able to go to the same schools as everybody else. And they're very conscious of the things that make them different. And I was speaking to a child very recently, and she actually just said to me, "I just want children to be less cruel." And that it's those things, I think, that when we're getting it right, there should be children in the city who are saying, actually, this is a great place to live because nobody is cruel. And they feel welcomed and accepted. And I think that's a really important thing. And I almost feel like, you know, sort of we create divisions by calling people things, you know, sends a horrible term in many ways. But it's about how we accept that difference exists, and some people will need more support than others to do certain things. But actually, this city can do that. It's got all the assets it needs to be able to do that. It just needs to get its head around it and get it done, really.
Just to add, I think there is something. I think there is something about being much more honest with communities and particularly with parents. Certainly, I've met with some parents very recently, and had a very, very honest conversation about, you know, we often talk about specialists in this place, and we often talk about it in lots of models of practice that we have around social intervention. But we talk about specialists in terms of psychologists and others. That the reality is we're primitive in terms of what we know about the brain, and by comparison to what we know about physical health. And I think, to be honest, there's probably much more work that we can do around being a bit more honest with families and communities to say, we haven't got the answers. Sometimes there isn't an answer, but actually what we can do is work alongside you and with you, and work through trusted relationships to perhaps work through, I guess, using a hypothesis about this might work. But sometimes I think parents are chasing something that they believe that there's a complete answer, and actually there isn't. But we've created that system because we've created posts that we see as being specialists. We've created, you know, nationally there are people that would claim to have very specialist knowledge in autism. We're still learning about autism in this country and abroad. We don't understand a tenth of what we understand about physical health. So I think there's probably a lot we need to do around trying to probably be a bit more honest with communities, and also a bit more honest about actually when we send children out of the city, and we spend £1 million on a placement, and it can be £1 million, it can even be £2 million on one placement for a child. The outcomes for those children is often horrific and poor. We've seen lots of stuff in the national news around the Hesley group and places where we've sent children with good trust. And the outcomes for those children have been not just poor, but actually they've been in abusive environments. So there's something about, actually, we want to keep children local. We want to keep children in York, in our local communities and with communities. How do we wrap around those families, but in a much more honest and, in an approach that is probably more of a social model than a medical model.
I've got a couple, if nobody else. On page 81, just my understanding, is that 87 people requested at the intake meeting sort of wanted an assessment of some sort, of which 42. So does that fit into the thing about parents chasing, that half the people actually want a diagnosis end up not needing?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. There is a feeling that unless you get the diagnosis, you won't get the help. And so what we need to really look at is, let's focus on, why is the child struggling in school? Just being professionally curious about, it's not going to harm anybody if you treat it as autism, because some of those strategies that you begin to employ will be beneficial. They'll open up learning for somebody. And so try not to think about, I can only view this if I've actually been given this label.
Yeah.
It's trying to just say, right, okay, there are some things that it might be useful to view it through this lens for a while. And some of these strategies might be helpful for you. And I think it's that really that we're trying to encourage both ourselves and health partners. What are those things that are early help type approaches that mean that you might even get a good result without needing to take it down a diagnosis route.
So is there something formal in place that those 45 people not getting, are they passed on to somebody else to say, look, you're not going to be diagnosed because, however, the teacher might just need to be aware that of an issue, or
yeah,
you do?
That's the bit that we've got to get much better at, because at the moment the system either says yes or no, and then what needs to happen is that people know that something's happening if the answer's been no. It's a little bit like when we get a request for statutory assessment and we decide not to issue a plan because we feel that strategies can be employed without the child's needs being set out in a plan. But we've got to be really specific then about what that support looks like, and that the school is confident, for example, in actually being able to implement that. And one of the things that there does need to be, as we're resetting the national SEND system, is to be fair to everybody who's a qualified teacher in this country. The teacher standards say every teacher is a teacher of SEND. But the big problem is that nobody's invested in that, other than individual teachers who just work harder and harder to try and do it. And there needs to be some national investment into making that real, because it is probably one of the main reasons why teachers leave the profession and leave mainstream, because they feel de-skilled. They feel as though there are certain children that they can't meet the needs of, and it gets to be quite a frustrating job if you're in those situations where you feel you can't make that breakthrough. And some of that could be solved by better quality professional development for teachers that is mandated, that they're able to access. Because at the moment, it's a bit of a lottery about how much training different teachers are able to access. And it can't just be the Senko. It, you know, that it will never work if you just say there's one person who's a SEND expert in a school. It's really, again, about investing in practice. I always say to Martin, you know, sort of for a social worker or an EP, you've got to re-register every year, and you've got to, as part of that re-registration, it's mandatory that you've got to do certain bits of professional development. Teaching is the one profession where you get QTS at a particular stage in your life and you never have to re-register. And nobody then is investing in your professional development unless you're in a good school that's doing that and really investing in it, or a school that can. Sorry. Bob. But I think that is one of the things that, you know, sort of, if anything, and it's difficult for us as a local authority because it's another financial burden on us, but that investment in professional development is so important. And that means also making sure that the school is able to release that person to be able to do that professional development, and that's a financial cost.
This Councillor Webb or teacher?
Both. This is Councillor Webb, qualified teacher status, achieved 2000.
But not re-registered.
Yeah, no, I think the only thing you know, Maxine said almost everything there. I think one thing that we are doing in York that started last year, I believe, is the adaptive teaching programme. That's been something that's been going on in numerous schools within York, and that is talking to a lot of what's been said so far about whether a young person has a piece of paper that says this is their need, or whether that young person, as a professional, you suspect that there might be a need, or indeed, actually, it's just better for all children. Adaptive teaching is really sort of bread and butter teaching, really, and it's looking at the young people in front of you and taking your using that professionalism and your skill to actually adapt to the people in front of you. And I think that one thing I've been quite heartened by is the commitment to sort of look at the curriculum that is in school right now, because I do think that if you can change that curriculum and make it a little bit looser and a little bit freer, and actually, you know, really support the idea of professionalism within schools, not just deliverers of content, you really do change that. And I think you're right, Maxine, that external professional development is almost certainly welcome. Sort of larger pieces of professional development definitely is important. But I actually think building time into schools for teachers to just, particularly in secondary schools, is, from my experience, I can't speak to primary school, but having the opportunity to say, I'm a physics teacher and I've got this young person and they express like this in my classroom, and Mr. English teacher, what do you find in your classroom? How does that work? So I think there's a lot to it, but in York, we're not investing, because that has been a bit of a partnership work between this authority and our schools. But and I'm really pleased with the work that's going on, but it's definitely something we need to continue and keep going with. And I'm hopeful that, you know, we see national change now, because I think it is, going back to the comms issue that Councillor Taylor raised earlier on, this is rising up the national concern. It's certainly in York, it's certainly a big concern. It's something we want to look at. I'm going to shut up now because we've been going at this item for hours. So.
I haven't finished yet. I think also it makes the point that, you know, picking up to Councillor Taylor's point, and that these people not getting picked up, is that in that survey, 20% said nothing is working well, which is quite staggering, that clearly it is working quite well. And to say nothing is working well, and the difference in the answers between the staff saying everything goes well and the parents saying, oh no, it doesn't. So clearly there is a disconnect, that you say, I didn't get my piece of paper, it's rubbish. Any other questions?
I think the one thing, obviously, to just back what Bob says is, if you're a parent, you won't see the adaptive teaching. And we haven't really been good at sharing what that actually means. And I think, if anything, it is it's getting that comms right in terms of this is the really good, strong practice that's going on in many schools in the city, and it looks like this, and this is what it actually does.
All right, before we go on, question for the committee, if you look at option 10, is there anything we want to consider for future scrutiny specifically? On page 44. Or 44 of the actual item. They throw in anything specific you want looking at for future? Any strong views? Oh, we have two strong views.
I actually think, given what we've heard tonight, how can I put this without crossing over boundaries that I maybe I should not cross over. But when you hear three professionals speaking from the heart, you think to yourself how fortunate we are to have that guidance and that interest and that sense of direction we've experienced in this report and in the verbal material that we've had tonight. I just want to say, for me, this what I've heard tonight makes me want to pursue the implications of paragraph 10 under options. Let's hear some more about this, and let's hear some more about it regularly, because I think, as Maxine was implying, actually, the more we talk about it, the more people outside this room recognise that there's a problem that we're actually trying to address. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I absolutely echo the remarks, Councillor Phillipson, and despite being substitute to this committee, I just think in terms of what might be useful to hear in the future is definitely some detailed feedback from the Parent Carer Forum, the results of the Talk to Me campaign, which is going to be launching in January. It's fantastic to hear that children are being consulted directly on this, not just parents as well, but parents and understanding the nuances and difference of opinion there. So absolutely think that that's worth noting if the committee will agree.
There are several areas in the report where it said that work was starting or ongoing, and if those could be picked out and an update given, that would be very helpful, including staffing.
Yeah, I think both the young people who've been part of the Talk to Me campaign and the Parent Carer Forum would welcome coming to Scrutiny. You
got that? Cool. Thank you very much. On we go. Joe and Niall. Neil. When you're ready, thank you.
Evening, colleagues. I'm very pleased to come and join you again this evening to update you on progress in relation to developing a new youth strategy for the city. This builds on an update that we brought only earlier this year in March. In that we outlined not just the activity that was taking place in the city, but also an ambition to develop a local youth partnership. Local youth partnerships are something which have been emerging in quite a number of areas across the country. We were lucky enough to host in York a national network of these youth partnerships. And it was really illuminating to see how they have developed. A key message which has come through from all of those partnerships is the importance of taking time to invest in developing the relationships and developing the capacity of that network to meet local need. I'm not going to go through every aspect of the report, but there are a few really important points I do want to draw your attention towards. So the first of which being around the development of the strategy and also to update you on the time frame in relation to that. At the beginning of the paper, we outlined that we would be aiming to come to the council executive in October to present the strategy for approval. We're now working to a timeframe of bringing that in November. The reason for doing so is because we're in that territory. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. There's a bit of further work that we want to do with the partners and in response to their needs locally about how we can develop the strategy and the actions to implement that strategy and ensure that has every chance of succeeding. There are a few other elements within the report I want to draw your attention to. So within the draft strategy, paragraphs 12 and 13 within the report outline the strategic ambition and the priorities that we've set out. We've been holding a number of sessions with the existing youth network and those partners. That's being facilitated for us by representatives from the regional youth work unit as a critical friend and an expert in local youth partnerships and their development. So paragraph 23 is some direct output from some of that work with partners and their aspirations for what they would want to see the network to do. We have a meeting next week with the youth network, the Emergent Youth Partnership, and that's where the partners have said they want to sort of start to shift towards more some practical planning in relation to how the partnership becomes established and practically testing out some of the ways in which they can work together in ways that we haven't experienced yet in the city. So that's the short version. There is the report there for you to consider. And I'd welcome any other questions or comments that you've got on any of the report.
Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to say this at risk of coming across like a really bad person, but hopefully it's sort of seen as a sort of challenge to be taken on. I read this report and I have to be honest, I thought if this piece of paper that I'm reading did not exist, what would be the difference? And by that, just to elaborate, there's a lot of nice language in it, fairly vague, but sort of common stuff. I'm not getting a sense of what's going to change as a result of this thing coming to life. And then I thought, to be even more difficult, what would happen if you just totted up all the time and resource that's gone into working on this and worked out the financial value of it and just gave it to all the people who are working with young people now in charities or whatever? Would that have more of an impact than the time and effort that's going into creating this strategy, which I'm not necessarily excited by, but more importantly, I'm not seeing how it's going to shift things in a way that is really going to make a difference. Now, yeah, that's where I'm at, and I don't mean to be horrible, but this council sometimes it feels like we're swimming in strategies, and or drowning. So I want to sort of, and each one stands on its own accord. So with this one, how would you sort of rebut everything I've said and sort of prove me wrong and make me get behind it?
I think it's an entirely fair challenge, and if we're going to have scrutiny, then these are questions that we should be asking ourselves. So I think the choices that were laid before us are sort of pretty clear. One of which is we can use the limited resource, and that word limited is very real. The very limited resource we have as a local authority to just go and try and do a traditional commissioning of youth provision. That option exists, and we can do that. Realistically, having seen the trajectory of youth services locally and nationally over the last 10, 15 years, what we will end up with is pretty much nothing. So as we've just had in conversations around SEND, we need to try and do something different. What we have seen local youth partnerships do in other areas is to attract additional funding. So at the very bottom line, that would be one of the minimum things that we would want to see the local youth partnership do, is to attract more funding into the local area, which can then be used to sustain youth provision and to make sure that youth provision is available for young people. So based between those two choices, that's why we are pursuing this other option. But I recognise the challenge that you're saying. I think the aspiration we would have, and certainly I think following the conversation in the last scrutiny committee, is we want to get there now. We want to have those solutions now. We want to see that youth provision in place now. Realistically, the experience that we've seen from talking to these other areas that have developed youth partnerships is it doesn't happen overnight. It does take time. So I do recognise the challenge that you're making, but faced with those two choices, saying if we pursue a youth partnership that in other areas has been shown to generate income and generate new opportunities for young people, or do a straight commissioning exercise with a continually reducing level of resource, I think that's the reason why I think we do need to still to pursue that option of a partnership.
Thanks for that.
Cheers. Yes, right. We've got a list now. In this Whitcroft next. So just then it's Waller, Runciman and Melly. And Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to try and be a bit friendlier than Councillor Taylor. But yeah, very pleased to see the involvement of the youth council here as a former youth councillor a long time ago now. But I'm also wanting to understand if we can go further in terms of the local youth partnership. Often when it comes to people who've got the time and the interest to put time into the youth council, their feedback is often very valuable. But I think there's one thing that we know about perhaps politics and the understanding of local politics is that not enough young people are educated about what a council does, what the different layers of politics are, and how large decisions can get made for the city. So I didn't know whether there was any option to sort of expand this further, perhaps into civics lessons at schools, for example, school assemblies, that sort of thing. So people who wouldn't normally sign up perhaps for a youth council can be more feel like they're more involved in the process as well, rather than just focusing on the people who've turned up. I just want to know if there's any chance to expand the scope of who we want involved in this sort of strategy.
I'll let Joe speak in a moment to sort of the youth council angle that's sort of facilitated within communities. The feedback from the youth council was that they had appetite for the partnership and the strategy, and that they would want to be involved in the delivery of the partnership as well. So in terms of like its overall governance, so that is something that we're working with partners on, about how could young people be actively involved in the development and the planning of that partnership. So I'll pass you to Joe in terms of the wider youth council.
Yeah, I certainly think that there would be an opportunity to do that. One of the things that's really struck me, and it complements the previous item but relates to your question, was the overwhelming priority that's come back from young people in this consultation exercise, either through the youth council or wider through different groups of young people and working with providers, is them wanting to feel this genuine sense of belonging in the city around inclusion, etc. And a lot of what the youth network has said to us is that, going back to Councillor Taylor's question, we want to get on with doing something. You know, so they've come up with the idea of a youth festival during National Youth Work Week, a give it a go type of festival that engages more and more young people in the city, that has more reach, supports voice, supports inclusion and belonging. So there's certainly more for us to do. But at the same time, through one of the points of consultation we had with young people through the Youth Council and the Make Your Mark survey, was that when asked what they perceive to be priorities, they're rightly saying health and well-being, inclusion, belonging, but not actually recognising the value of youth work in that, which is something we want to sort of revisit with them and sort of reimagine what youth work should be today. So there's certainly opportunities to build on that, I would say. Yeah. Is this an answer, Bob? Sorry,
just a quick point to follow up on that last point you made, Joe. I think it's really important that for a lot of children, and I'm, talking children up to 16, 17 here, remember that they have never experienced youth work. They have never seen it because a lot of it has been cut over decades now, and certainly obviously since 2010. So yeah, it's really important to remember that some children, when you say, oh, would you like to prioritise youth work,
They've never actually seen it. They don't know what it is. It's not existed in their lifetime.
Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. It was difficult to understand from this document what it would actually mean on the ground. And I think there's a disconnect, which I think even Councillor Taylor was referring to, in terms of what happens in West offices versus what happens in the rest of the city. So there will be an interest in certain activities will be what you're looking at developing. But there are other things that actually this strategy isn't going to address, and it would be useful to know what activities with young people we will see develop, and if this additional funding is brought in, and there's even cultural passports from the mayor. What does that actually mean in day-to-day experience of young people? And then it's demonstrating that outside of those young people that you have consulted, that there's the opportunity for the broader experience to be included in, well, this is what they're after, because groups of young people are interested in different things. Some people, some of them like sport, some of them really don't. And there's a number of experiences that they would like in terms of broadening horizons and thinking, well, actually that's something that young people with different parents, it would be normal for them, but actually I'd like to have that experience so that I can come to a better decision about what I want to do with the rest of my life.
Are you answering?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I wanted to speak to that. I know I'll be quiet.
Sorry,
I think you make a really important point, Councillor Waller, and I think the previous report did go into all of those other considerations, those wider considerations that the council has more input to, and particularly the combined authority as well, with the cultural passports funding, which will bring a lot of funding to York to broaden young people's experience. I just wanted to say the point about this, however, is not the council strategy, it's the city strategy. And as with the anti-racism strategy, it took quite a long time to co-produce that with other organisations in the city. That wasn't led by us, that was led by IER UK 3.0. It took a long time, and this is taking a longer time to get to the what, which councillors have referred to, but certainly what what the partnership will be telling us and working with us on over the next few weeks will be about improving communication and coordination across all of the different charities and community and voluntary sector providers. How to build better relationships between those groups so they're coordinated and looking in one direction. How to include and hear the voice of young people. How they can share their resources that they get, as well as the bids for more finances. And how they can share what is available with our communities, how we communicate that. So that families and young people have access to all of that support. So in terms of filling that void of what might look like, that's certainly the direction of the conversation we hope to have with those organisations. So hopefully that's helpful, but absolutely we need to feed in those other wider considerations into the strategy. Thank you.
Councillor Runciman.
Thank you. I was just searching back in my mind, Councillor Webb. I was lead member when the money for youth services was pulled, and I think that's 15 years ago. And I can.
I'm not blaming
Maybe
you,
more than
councillor.
that.
I'm sure it was someone above you.
I remember it happening, and I remember the gloom in the education department when it happened. But coming back to now, I should be interested to hear what happens in the meeting that's coming up. And I hope that that will come back to this committee, because I think this is an area we really do need to keep an eye on. It's been rather a gap, I think, and I hope that it will sort of come to life again. And then my last point is, I hope that the officers are aware that money is coming in from parish councils. Certainly, at least one of the parish councils I sit on is investing in youth work, and it's detached youth work. And as Councillor Webb said, there'll be a lot of young people who have no idea what detached youth work is. But I do think it's important that we don't, I think it's unrealistic to think that the council will be able to fund everything. And therefore we have to look for alternative sources of funding. And one of those sources which may be overlooked is the parish councils.
Thank you. If just picking up on that point, that's a key thread that's come through with the work with partners. We know that actually youth work in York is funded through a range of sources, including ward funding, individual organisations making charitable applications. But coming back to the point about the partnership, we know that as a city, we have missed out on some significant money, not that necessarily we as a local authority that could bid on, but that either if partners work together in the city, they could collectively bid for, which we just haven't then been able to access. So all of those sources, including parish councils, is a really important part of this.
Councillor Webb. Thank you, Chair. Just sort of finish this one off really. I think what you're looking at here is very much a starter for 10, I think, really, isn't it? It's a good place to start with. And I think, you know, Councillor Taylor, you're new to the committee, but you spotted that straight away and you didn't hold back, but you're right to do so. And I think that what I'd say is that the whole purpose of this is taking all those little bits of organisations, connecting them together to try and give them strength. I think that, you know, I was recently down at Door 84 in the Groves, where they've just had a project been going on through York St John. They've been sort of essentially talking to them about what good youth provision looks like, because Door 84 is, to be honest, some of the last we've got that's like that in the city. And you know, I think the written report might have come out already. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's certainly something that is worth a look at, because young people, other organisations really gave a good feel about what they wanted to see. And I think that could feed into this as well. In terms of timing and what happens next with this, there is a certain urgency to this, in the sense that if we don't move on to the next step, we actually lose some of the funding. So what I would say is potentially we wouldn't necessarily manage to get back to another scrutiny meeting before we need to move on to the next stage, and I need to sort of make a decision. But what I would be happy to do, Councillor Runciman, is once this meeting's happens next week and there's some clear outcomes and steps, I've got feedback on that, I'm happy to feed that back to the committee outside of this meeting, if that's acceptable to everybody. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. So I put my hand up a long time ago and almost everything's been said. I don't want to just repeat things. Like, we all know that youth services have just been cut and cut and cut to the point that they're just decimated. Door 84 is in my ward. I go there quite often, and when they were doing this project, like looking into youth service, I went along and young people interviewed me and they showed me around and showed me what I want, you know, all the wonderful stuff they do there. And it's really, really valuable, but there's so little of it. So I'm glad that, you know, this strategy is happening and so many different organisations coming together to work together on trying to deal with such a huge challenge. But I do agree with Councillor Taylor and Councillor Waller that there's seems to be so little out of it yet.
You know, this report's been brought to us for comment before it goes to the executive, and I don't really feel like there's anything for us to comment on. It's all just very wishy-washy and nice. It's nice, but there's nothing practical or substantial in it yet. I hope there will be. It says in the report there's a meeting in September. Is that the meeting you're referring to next week? I hope there will be after that. Maybe it should have come to scrutiny after that meeting when there's something for us to actually comment on. Yeah, that was all I was going to say, I think, really.
If you don't answer, Martin wants to. Oh, no, sorry.
Sorry, because from just looking at the report, the only kind of slightly practical thing in there is to do with moving away from a funding and provider model to a collaborative model, but there isn't anything about the ramifications of that, because if funding is so scarce, like funders quite often want a funding provider model because they're the funders, that's the model they work within. They want to know exactly who they're providing funding to. What exactly is that organisation who's going to be responsible for that funding and delivering what that funding has been provided for, and then being accountable for reporting back that they have achieved what they're going to report. And there's nothing in there about the ramifications of that changing model, and that's the only information we've been given. And I think we haven't got enough information to really be able to comment on it yet.
So I think what you're, I hope I'm not just rephrasing this in a way that makes me feel slightly better, but I think what you're demonstrating is some of the complexity of the conversations that are having within the partnership at the moment. But these partners have not worked together in this way before. They've often been competing with each other for funding. So for us to sort of move from coming to you in March with a scrutiny paper to say, actually, we can then develop this partnership, and now they are going to be all working in lockstep and with clear understanding about how they would share how they would share funding, how they're going to jointly bid into things. The development of the relationships don't happen in that space of time. However, we have been having regular sessions with the network to develop that. What I do accept, though, is actually that doesn't yet, there isn't a tangible piece to show from that. I think when we came to scrutiny previously in March, we were originally slated to come back in December to speak to you and provide you with an update, by which point there would be the strategy, and there would also be the more tangible outcomes from how the partnership wanted to work together. So I do hear and understand what you're saying, and as I've said earlier, we would want to be in a place where we have those tangible things as well, because we can see beyond the foggy horizon. We can see that there is a place beyond this where actually there is some tangible promise, and that's where we want to get to, not to be having these conversations.
I'd just back Neil up on that briefly, on that point, that the experience we've heard from the national network of local youth partnerships that's facilitated by the Young People's Foundation Trust is when they've moved from that model of grant giver to collaboration, they've just attracted so much more funding, and it's also supported them to work in a different way in their respective towns and cities that is delivering better outcomes for young people and is more strategic and more joined up. So that's some of the conversations we've been having with the local youth network, and they're behind it. They want to do that shift, but it takes time. And I think having the right sort of local youth partnership structure then in place that they all buy into and own will then support them again to be successful in drawing external funding down that they're not getting at the moment. As Neil says, funds are being missed. Martin.
Yeah, I think it's just I think everybody's right, and I think the challenge is absolutely appropriate. I think the difficulty with this, and we heard a little bit about the Parent Carer Forum earlier on, that's taken 3 years to mould to a place where actually we've got something really effective, really efficient. I think, you know, we've got 40 odd providers of youth services across the city, all of which are in competition with each other. You know, it's a bit like getting Tesco's and Asda to work with each other. To a degree, you've got to get those that are competing for small amounts of money into a place where actually they're able to compete for huge amounts of money, potentially through big lottery and other funders that will listen to 40 providers together. And that takes time. If we just, you know, I could write a strategy, any one of us can go away and write a strategy and put it in place, but none of them will come to the table. And I think that's what we've heard in the conversations that we've had so far is we only want to engage with you if actually we're going to be writing some part of it. So I think that's why, to a degree, we are where we are in terms of it's a slower process than we certainly expected. but it's the right thing to do. I think this will generate a lot more money, and unless we're prepared as a council to stop £500,000 worth of services somewhere and reinvest it into youth services, we absolutely will not get what we need as a youth provision in the city. This will generate the opportunity to be a bit more ambitious than we have been, I think, but using a small amount of money to help other organisations access money that we simply can't access. You know, the money that you can get as a charity is significantly better than what we can probably access as a local authority. But we need all of those 40 to come together and to work together in one space with one vision, and that takes a long time to get there. So I think just to manage expectation, even when we come back with a strategy, I'm not sure it's going to be saying something quite as clear as what you want in terms of we're going to have a youth club here, a youth club there. It's going to be a bit more about how do we expect them to work together over the next 12 months to get to somewhere that's going to be much more ambitious in the next few years.
Thanks, Chair. I'm slightly wary of adding further negativity to the proceedings, but I just I suppose what I was, when I read the report, I wasn't quite sure where young people's voice was in it. It feels like there's quite a lot of discussion about providers and that sort of thing, and people are coming into contact with young people. I wasn't quite sure quite where a young person's voice was in this, but you have sort of referenced that has been part of the process. I just wanted a bit more clarification. That quite new to how, you know, youth networks and things work, I suppose.
Yeah, so in terms of the work that we've done so far, obviously we've used existing channels, things like the Youth Council, we've utilised sort of the networks that we have with our care experienced young people as well, but also the youth providers. Through the network meetings, we've asked them to take things back into their own networks and ask questions with young people that they're working with as well. So whilst we haven't done sort of a single citywide big piece of survey, I think we've probably done smaller conversational work and consultation with those groups of young people. And as I referenced earlier, I think one of the things that's emerged from that is young people's desire to be active and have a voice and seat at the table within that partnership as well.
Councillor Grosher.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure whether these are going to be questions or more sort of observations and things, but a couple of things that just sort of crossed my mind, and I'm not going to echo lots of what's been said I've agreed with, but just practical things. I don't know whether this would fit with the youth partnership or whether it's something that would sit within City of York or not. With my chair of planning hat on, it's not uncommon for us to get a planning application forward that has an area of play equipment or an area of some sort of provision, and the comments to come in from an early years team saying, actually, we need some 0 to 5 or we need some 5 to 12 or whatever. I don't think I've ever seen something that's come in and said, what we need is something for 12 to 17-year-olds. And there was a piece of work that was done by My Future York a few years ago. I think it was mainly around the My Castle Gateway and that bit, but it was a broad sense. They were talking to a whole range of different communities. And the thing that I remember most about it was the almost paucity of ambition from the young people's feedback. They were sort of saying, what do you want in York? What do you want from the city? And what they wanted was a bench, preferably possibly 2 benches that were a bit further apart so that if there were people they didn't like on one bench, they could go and sit on the other bench. If they could really push the boat out and get somewhere where they had a phone charging point, and really, really extravagant was a kettle. But, you know, those are all sorts of things which I think ought to be achievable through things like, you know, when we're getting 500 houses being built in places and we're thinking about how that space and place works. But I'm not sure where that voice comes into that process. We seem to have the other age groups kind of fitted in, but not necessarily that part. And I think what that also speaks to me about is it's actually about a space and a place that young people can call their own, and that might be a youth club, or it might be a different sort of venue, or it might just be a bench. But I think, you know, in this strategy, and I'll take all the sort of ambition that we're thinking of it for longer term. But I also think sometimes it's just the really little tiny things that can make a huge difference to young people and to small groups of young people's experience. Because I think particularly that kind of under 18, but kind of teenage, they're really maligned in our ward. They sit out on the little Knavesmire and they're just hanging out. That's all they're doing. But we get all kinds of problems in terms of complaints about antisocial behaviour. And so giving them spaces that are theirs, I think for me would be the best thing that we could do in the city. And then just one other thing, which is just a little bit flippant, I think, but page 97, paragraph 23, part 3 says the partnership name to be decided. I don't know who's going to decide that name. I hope the young people will have a significant say, because I think having a really naff name will be terrible. And my personal request is if it could not please be your something or other, because so many strategies and things in the city are your something or other. It'd be nice just to be something completely different and, its own identity. That's me.
Comment on the observations?
No, I take on board those comments, and I think yes, I think there's certainly quite a bit about young people that fed back to us about their sense of belonging and stigma that they feel just being a young person in the city. We've also been working with the University of York, they've been doing some research into demographics and geographies of inequality. And a good example would be if you're a young person who wanted to enjoy our recent European Championships, where would you go and watch that? With a group of friends? That isn't a pub. That isn't the sort of spaces that are available in the city. So we would hope that would be a consequence of this, is that there are more spaces and more understanding and belonging for young people in our city.
If I can just add, just as a really concrete example, I know the Make Space for Girls project did a big lot of work speaking to young people in Roundtree Park. And again, the thing that they settled on that they wanted was a basket swing. It's not big stuff. And I think it ended up costing about 10 or 15,000 pounds, which again, when you think of it with developers' hats on, that's not necessarily a big ask for a 106 contribution. But that request, I don't think ever comes forward for that age group, because I don't think there's a voice for that age group within the council at the moment.
I mean, just to add, within the sort of draft priorities that have come back, the first one is young people have safe spaces to be with their friends. So we're hearing it back as well, alongside that sense of belonging, but the importance of friendship and relationships and safe spaces.
Cool. Just one question for me. Have you still got your 40,000?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
A minute that. Cool. Obviously, going forward, Councillor Webber kindly agreed to an update us at the next appropriate meeting. It could be the next one, it might be one after. But
yeah, at an appropriate point, I'll because essentially the process we'll follow is we need to do some work to get the process started. We don't want to lose money, which means I need to make sort of executive decisions as well. But in advance of that, I'll make sure that this committee's got sight of that and knows what's available moving forward. So yeah, that's where we are. And I think that actually tonight has been really useful, really, to sort of build in a lot of feedback from what different people have said. And we can go from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 7, work plan. Those who hadn't noticed, there was no school attendance report tonight. It's slipped into October due to a computer error. Is that correct? Computer error? It was left.
And Councillor Webb's here. Have you seen what the sort of scoping document or outline or requirements is for the Free School Meals Review? Has that been published, made available?
So I'm not sure what the question about in terms of that item on the 5th of November. So I suppose what I can say now is I've got a meeting with University of York, University of Leeds, who've been doing the research for us. I've got a meeting with them think it's in the next couple of weeks, end of September at the latest. So we are on track to get to that point. Now, the purpose of that will be a review of what we've done so far. And that gives this committee and the council essentially an opportunity to feed into decisions moving forward. Now, in terms of council decisions, there aren't any to make because the funding that we've already put in, the 100,000 a year, has already been allocated. We've already done that budget council. I don't think you supported it, but you know, it did happen. Beyond that, it's public. Sorry, Councillor Waller, do you want to comment? No? Okay. So what will happen next after that point is it's about what we can do publicly in the steering group. So this is a public opportunity, it's a council opportunity to see what's happened so far. And then we need to make some decisions after that as a citywide steering group. So that'll come at a future date. Does that sort of answer your questions where we are?
Sort of. It was more around.
Oh, one more thing. I am hopeful that it should make that November date, as far as I know. I've not been told otherwise. If it does slip, I will let the chair know. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor.
Can I go on, follow up? Yeah. It was just on that. There's been various goals that the free school meal programme is trying to achieve. It's variously gone from cost of living crisis to school attendance to school achievement. I was just hoping within this review, it would start to offer some clarity around what the goals are.
So what we've asked the University of York, University of Leeds to look at is, has it had an effect on attendance? Is it affecting attainment? Now, that's obviously very difficult to measure in a short space of time, but anecdotally from teachers, what are they saying, for example? And is it supporting with cost of living by essentially supporting families because of reduced expenditure, things like that? Again, that will be coming through from parent voice, I imagine. And what else? Actually looking at the content of the food and actually looking at what healthy food is actually going into the young people. I think the University of Leeds are particularly interested in that sort of quantitative work. But as I say, I haven't seen what they've researched yet. I haven't seen the outcomes yet. So when I do and when we're ready, we'll put something forward. But right now, we are on plan for November.
Thank you. So next month we've got quarter one finance again, early years childcare, virtual school and school attendance. Lovely, no urgent business? Oh, there is, Pauline. Sorry.
Sorry, Chair. We are taking a report to executive in December on a locality model, how we can work better with communities with the services that we've got in an integrated way. And Health are working on similarly on integrated working within communities, and we're coming together on that. And we'd like to work with Scrutiny on those proposals ahead of going to executive in December. Now, an element of that will be community caretaking. And I understand the economy scrutiny, Councillor Taylor is considering that in November, which again will feed into the same report to executive. So given that the remit of this committee is communities, would you allow us to bring a localities model report in probably November is the best timing for us, if that's helpful.
Any views? That's Councillor Waller. I think can I take
is that, could I ask if this is including community centres? Because there's an outstanding issue a year on that the Foxwood Community Centre lease has not been set up. and it is causing great concern within the community.
Could I ask you to write to me directly on that, councillor Wallow? We won't be going into that detail. This is a strategic model for community working across the city rather than, it will include assets.
If I'm being too pragmatic, then I'll take it to it separately. I'll email you separately.
Thank you.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair. Just a general sort of point. My view would always be that if we have an opportunity to do some pre-decision scrutiny where we can have a meaningful input on something before it goes to executive, we should always welcome those opportunities. Right. And so if there's a possibility to jiggle things around and fit something in, I would certainly be supportive of that. If it's, gets to the point where it's really difficult to fit in and we need to look at an additional pre-decision scrutiny session, I would rather not have an additional meeting, but would the opportunity to do the pre-decision, I think, would be better than not, and just passing it up. So I'd support it.
Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. Just with my EPAC committee hat on, totally agree with Councillor Crawshaw. It's good to get as much access to these things as possible through scrutiny. But it sounds like there's some sort of overlap between, or at least connection between what might end up coming here and what might come to EPAT. And I think it's important that certainly the committee chair and all members on both committees have absolute clarity on where those lines are, where those connections are, because we have asked for neighbourhood caretakers to come to the EPAT committee for November. I haven't yet got confirmation that that is doable. I think that's a live discussion. So, it's stuff, this will all need to happen in more meaningful ways offline, but just want to make sure that each committee gets the right thing. Otherwise, it will be a wasted discussion.
So in principle, yes to November. And if we chat, us three chat and decide what goes where.
I think you're proposing and seconding to then add to the work plan. You wanting to add it in November.
Councillor Crawshaw proposed it. Councillor Clark seconded it.
Just the formality.
There you go. Obviously free school meals in November is going to be a biggie, and if we had that one as well, we can always move something down. But if we have a chat and sort something out, either whether it's a joint one or you represent your committee here or something. We'll figure it out. We'll talk about it. Are we happy with that? Chair, sort it out. It'll get it, don't worry. Anything else? All happy. He's only got 30 seconds left. Lovely. Thanks very much for your time, everybody.